kids!
Well, hello. Today's lesson is a really exciting one. So let me first ask a question to you. Have you ever been to a wedding? It's really quite exciting going to a wedding. You see lots of friends and family, and there's lots of food too. But today's lesson is about Jesus going to a wedding. A wedding in Cana of Galilee. It was an exciting time for all who went. This is a place at this wedding where Jesus performed his first miracle, we are told in John chapter 2. And we're going in at verse 1. Now, before we begin to read slowly, there are, of course, as I've said before, a number of things to keep in mind. Use your imaginations. Pretend you're actually there at the wedding with Jesus and with all these other people. When we read the verses, read with care. Nothing is wasted. Everything is important. Stop and think. Let's begin, shall we? John chapter 2, verse 1. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. We're not told who was getting married, but we're told that the mother of Jesus was also a guest at the wedding. Oh, but look at verse 2. And both Jesus was called. He had an invitation. And his disciples. Must have been a large wedding. And this couple who had got married, who was getting married, maybe Jesus knew them really well. And the disciples and Mary. Hey, maybe they were distant relatives. We're not told. But what we are told is Jesus is invited to a wedding with the disciples. And who were the disciples? What were their names? Oh, well, we know those names. Let's try again. If we remember, if we haven't heard the rhyme before, then maybe we can learn it for next time. Peter, Andrew, James and John, fishermen of Capernaum. Thomas and Matthew too, Philip and Bartholomew, James, his brother Thaddeus, Simon, and the one named Judas. 12 disciples here in all, following the Master's call. So they were all invited to the wedding. It was a special time at the wedding. Lots of guests, lots of food. It was a celebration. It was a happy time. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage in Cana. Do you know what the word Cana means? The word Cana means place of reed. You know the reeds? And you see them maybe down by the river, the reeds. In fact, Jesus says something about John the Baptist, doesn't he? He says to the people, remember, John the Baptist was not a reed shaken in the wind. This man was a man of faith, but that's for another time. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, they have no wine. So what had happened? They were enjoying themselves, dancing, eating, drinking. And there were lots of people at that time who, and for a celebration, it was a good time. And they were pouring the wine. And they were celebrating as they ate and as they had a sip of wine or two. There would have been lots of grapes maybe at that time as they, because after all, that's where we get the wine from. It was a lovely time, a happy time. And there, of course, was the happy bride and groom. Oh, but there was a problem. A big problem, which was about to unfold. There was a man there also. He was in charge of looking after the food, looking after the wine, making sure that all the tables were laid out nicely. It was a lovely time. A man and his wife. A lovely celebration. And of course, there was dancing to celebrate this lovely time, this marriage. And so they would settle down to start eating and drinking, and they were all enjoying themselves. But then there was a problem. It could have been quite embarrassing. The servant comes and says, oh, we've run out of wine. There's no wine left. What are we going to do? How embarrassing. What will the neighbors say? What will our friends say? We've invited all these guests to the wedding and we haven't got enough to give them. Oh, our wedding is ruined. However, there was someone there who could help. We're told in verse 3, as we've read before, and when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, they have no wine. Now that's interesting. They didn't go and talk to Jesus and say, Jesus, can you help us? We've got no wine. You get the impression that Jesus was maybe just watching, not to show himself. You get the impression he was quite humble. His mom, Mary, she was used to noticing things, you know. Moms are usually good at noticing things. Have you noticed? And someone tells Mary, or maybe no one tells her, maybe she just notices. Maybe she sees that the servants are they're panicking, they're nervous, they're scared. What are we going to do? We've got no more wine. Hey, have you ever been to a wedding and they've run out of food? Well, now what happens next is beautiful. Because Mary sees that there's a problem and she asks Jesus to help. Oh, that's important, isn't it? If we have a problem, ask God to help us. Pray about it. He can help. We must pray about it. So then, the verse says that Mary says to Jesus, they've got no wine. Oh, it's going to be really embarrassing. This poor young couple, they want it to be a special day, Jesus, but they haven't got any wine. I wonder why they didn't have enough wine. Maybe they just couldn't afford it. Maybe they were quite poor, but they wanted lots of their friends to be there. That's a good lesson too, isn't it? Even though they didn't have maybe enough money, maybe they had to give their things away to the Romans in taxes. They had to give the Roman soldiers money. They didn't have much themselves. All they knew that this couple loved each other and they wanted to get married and spend their lives together in serving God. Whatever the reason, Jesus was there. And Mary knew that Jesus could help. They have no wine. There's none left. Jesus said unto her, what's it got to do with me? It sounds unkind, but it wasn't unkind. Jesus is saying, well, I don't really want to get involved because... But Mary knew. When she looked at Jesus, she'd seen that look before. He had a plan. My hour is not yet come. This is not the right hour. What did Jesus mean? My hour is not yet come. Well, do you know, Jesus is not thinking about the wedding there in Cana. He's thinking about one day in the future, 3 and a bit years later, where his hour would come, and through his death, through his resurrection, through his shed blood, that would be his hour. Isn't that amazing? Even at that time, Mary's talking to Jesus about the wine at a wedding, and Jesus is thinking about the wine that he would talk about in the future. So maybe that's an important clue about this first miracle that Jesus performed. Maybe it points forward in a beautiful way to the future. Well, yes, it does. His mother saith unto the servants, whatsoever he says unto you, do it. Mary knew her son so well, and she saw that look in his eye. He was more than willing to help. And she turns to them, whatever he says, do it, because he has a plan. He doesn't want the day to be spoilt for this young couple who are getting married on their special day. He wanted to help them. So, what does he do? And there were set there 6 water pots of stone that the Jews have, there were 6 of them. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. 6 of them. Large pots filled with water. And what would happen is they would go to a wedding, or before they eat, they would wash their hands to make sure everything was nice and clean, and then they would eat the food. So they would wash their hands, and then maybe they might, have a few grapes. Very nice, because it was a wedding, and you have to have clean hands when you're eating food. Very important. So Jesus says, fill all those water pots with water. Jesus said unto them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. Whoa. These water pots, they were really, really big, with lots of water in. And so, when all those water pots were filled with water, look what happens next. Fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim, right to the top. And he saith unto them, draw out now, take some of the water, take some it out, and bring it to the governor of the feast first. Ooh, that's a bit scary if you're a servant. So the servant took and filled up the water pots with water, and then they dipped it in, and they poured out, and they brought it to the man who was in charge, the governor. Now, who was the governor? The governor was the person who was in charge of the food and of the drink at the wedding, making sure everything's nice. We've got water, we've got wine, we've got lots of food for people to enjoy themselves. And this governor was in charge of the wine, and he was in charge of the food to make sure everything is right, because he didn't want to upset the day to make the bride and the groom sad. It was their special day. So the servant takes and pours it out. It's no longer water. No longer water. It's wine. Wow. Wow. That was amazing. But there's something else. And when the ruler, verse 9, of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, he didn't know where it had come from. He didn't know. And the governor turned to the one who had got married, and he says, he tasted the wine. The wine, it was the nicest wine he had ever tasted in all the years of going to all the weddings ever. It was the best wine ever. Now, can I tell you something about wine? The older the wine is, the better it tastes. But that's strange, isn't it? How old was this wine that Jesus had turned from water into wine? 1 minute old? 2 minutes old? 3 minutes old? 5 minutes old? Sometimes wine can be about 40, 50, 60, 80, 90 years old, and it gets better and better. But Jesus's wine was about 5 minutes old. 5 minutes! It was made in a few seconds. And it was the best. I have a question. You see, the power of God can do anything. It can make things seem older than what they really are. That's God's power, you see. And the governor thought that that wine was the best ever. So what are the lessons for us young people? Well, God will always have the answers. God sent Jesus that we might live. And so let's remember that Jesus has always been there in the pages of the Bible. And now we wait for him to return for that marriage supper. Oh, but that's for another time. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Pura